Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting the third video in my series on how to play the King's Indian attack against the French defense. And the game you're about to watch is from the same correspondence tournament as the game in video number 2. In this game I'm playing an international master from Israel, and as you shall see in the video, he takes a different approach to my King's Indian attack than the one we saw in the first two videos. I'm playing the white pieces and the game started e4, e6, and d3, d5, knight d2, c5, g3, knight c6, bishop g2. And now my opponent plays g6, and in the first two games in this series, black played a setup with knight f6 and bishop e7, and then went for queenside expansion. In this game, my opponent focuses entirely on the kingside, and with g6, he prepares the fianchetto of his kingside bishop, and in the continuation he brings his pieces to the center and the kingside rather than playing on the queenside. I played knight h3, bishop g7, castles, knight g to e7, and with this setup he prepares to meet my e5 push with the immediate attack f6. f4, castles, and now I played e5, and immediately black played f6 here. E takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight f3, queen d6, and c3 is necessary to restrict the black pieces and to free the bishop from defending the b2 pawn. Bishop d7, knight f2, and the book move here is e5. And then a few games have continued rook e1, rook f to e8, and then for example f takes e5, knight takes bishop f4, knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, and queen c6 with equal chances, I would say. But my opponent didn't play e5. Instead, he played h5. And this h5 move does take the g4 square away for my knight, but it also weakens the g6 pawn, and it makes it easier for white to attack the black kingside pawns by playing g4. Bishop d2 followed, and he played rook a to e8, and here queenside expansion was clearly an alternative for him, but he still prefers to stay solid in the center. Queen e2, bishop g7, rook a to e1, and knight f5. And with all pieces developed and black's early h5, it's time for me to put a knight on the g5 square. And I could have played the f3 knight to g5 immediately, and then I could have put the other knight on e3 to challenge his knight on f5. But instead, I decided to play the f2 knight to g5, so I played knight h3 here, and rook e7. Here a possible break could be e5, but then f takes, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, queen f3, rook takes, and rook takes, and then the d5 pawn is hanging, and I can play bishop f4 next, and I will have a good position here. And if instead, after e5 and f takes e5, if instead knight takes e5, then simply bishop f4 pinning the knight, and an uncomfortable position for black. So the e5 break is not possible for black, so he played rook e7 instead. And I put my knight on g5 as planned, rook f to e8, queen f2, and again e5 would be met by f takes e5, knight takes e5, and bishop f4, still better for me. So he played rook f8 instead. And now I thought it was time to play for the g4 break, so I played h3 here. Bishop f6 followed, and g4. And if h takes g4 here, then h takes, knight h6, queen h4, rook h7, and f5 is extremely complicated. I think white is better, but the complications are very hard to see through here. So He played knight h6 instead, and I played knight e5, eyeing the weak g6 pawn. And now my opponent has several moves, and let's look at some of them. For example, knight takes e5 here. This loses a piece to f takes e5 because bishop takes would lead to a mate on f8. And bishop takes e5 would be met by f takes e5, rook takes f2, e takes d6, rook takes, king takes, rook e8, and after knight takes e6, bishop takes h6. This would also be winning for white. And he could also defend the g6 pawn by playing bishop e8 here. And again, it gets very complicated after knight takes e6, bishop takes, and f5. And finally, he could also have opted to play h takes g4, then knight takes g6, g takes h3, bishop takes, rook g7, rook takes knight takes f8, king takes f8, and white is up the exchange and also better in this line. So what happened in the game was that he played bishop takes g5, and I took on g6, rook e to e8, and with queen e3 I remove the queen from the pin in the f-file, so the bishop on g5 is hanging now, and so is his rook on f8, of course. So bishop f6, and I took the exchange, and now I have rook and pawn for 2 knights. And now I can play f5 here, and I can do this because the knight on h6 is unprotected. So that's what makes this break possible. Knight f7, f takes e6, rook takes e6, queen f2. The black king can now feel the pressure down the central files, and this is the problem for black now, is that his king is unprotected. All his pawns are gone and he is only protected by pieces. Rook takes, bishop takes to keep the pressure in the f-file, and the king has to protect the bishop on f6, so he's played king e7, then came g takes h5, and knight c to e5, d4, c takes, and now of course knight d3 doesn't work because of queen e3 check, so instead he plays knight c6, then came king h1, because now bishop takes d4 is not possible because the knight on f7 would be hanging. Bishop e8 defends the knight, queen e3 check, king f8, h6. This pawn spells trouble for black, so bishop takes d4, queen g5, and now h7 is a threat. Knight e7 defends the g8 square in case I play h7 now. But now I came up with a nice move, queen h4. It's attacking their bishop, and it's supporting a future bishop b4 for me. So after bishop b5, I moved my rook, and then came bishop b4. Queen e6, a4, and now if bishop g7, then rook g3 is a strong move. And after knight takes h6, there's a computer line here. Bishop takes e7, queen takes on h6 with check, bishop g7, queen f4 check, queen f6, queen b8 check, king e7, rook e3 check, king f7, and bishop takes d5. And in all variations, black is lost here. But he didn't play bishop g7. He played bishop c4, I played b3, and now bishop a6 and h7. He now moved king e8, queen d3, and knight e5, and then came queen g8 check. A very nice move, simplifying things here. And if knight takes the queen here, then rook f8 check, and it would lead to exactly the same position as happened in the game, as we shall see here, because in the game my opponent took with the queen, but then h takes g8 queening, knight takes, rook f8 check, and we have the same position. And now we have reached this endgame, which is winning for white because of the h-pawn, which cannot be stopped without giving up material. And several moves were still played, but the outcome was never in question. Knight d3, bishop a3, bishop d4, h4, bishop f3, b5, h5. I simply advance my h-pawn as soon as possible, and now I also won the pawn on the queen side, so now I have two pawns, the a pawn and the h pawn, and it's of course impossible for black to stop both of them. And after a few more moves, my opponent resigned the game. So this was a different kind of game than the two first games in this series. In this game, black tried to consolidate his king side instead of expanding on the queen side. But his h5 move was a positional blunder. It weakened g6 and made it much easier for me to open up his king position, and in the end, the lack of king safety cost him the game. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you on my chess website at clausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.